All right. So I'm Doug Parsons. I'm a professor of physics and astronomy at Tyler Junior College in Tyler, Texas. It's a rewarding job. I got my master's of physics with concentrations in astronomy at Stephen F. Austin State University down in Nacogdoches, Texas. In most cases, there's 3 or 4 different names that you can give the object that you might have found, whether it be a planetoid or a minor planet. Most oftentimes we call it a minor planet, since planetoid's not necessarily truly recognized by the IUA, the International Astronomical Union. I move my hands a lot. Anyways, the definition we usually give it is a minor planet, which is to say an object that's orbiting the sun but does not contain the majority of the mass in the orbit that it travels around the sun. Therefore, it's not a full planet, just a kind of a minor one, or a dwarf planet if you get big enough, like Pluto or Ceres or Vesta, 2 of the asteroids in the asteroid belt. So that's what we found. We found a minor planet orbiting around the sun about 4 times the distance from the sun that the Earth is. So kind of out there.
So are all minor planets, are all satellites and asteroids minor planets?
I don't think all of them are. I mean, like I mentioned Ceres and Vesta. Those are 2 asteroids, but they're big enough that we consider them to be dwarf planets or planetoids or planetesimals even, the beginning building blocks of what a planet would eventually become. Given more time and materials, those things would become planets, but no, we don't call all asteroids minor planets, just most of them.
But you found a minor planet.
I found a minor planet.
About how big is a minor planet?
It can range anywhere from the size of a car to, well, mine was 4 kilometers long, along the long axis. So long as it's not round in shape, it can be a minor planet, which most asteroids aren't round.
How hard is it to find one of those?
Honestly, not all that terribly hard. Turns out the more we've developed technologies for capturing images of the nighttime sky with better cameras and better telescopes, the more these minor planets have been found and discovered. Started out with just a couple early on, and then it quickly ramped up into hundreds each year. So it's not too terribly hard to find it, although it might take a lot of time and dedication to find it. Some colleagues that I've worked with before, they've been looking for asteroids for years and haven't found any. And then, I happened to find one. So, interesting story there, finding this minor planet. We weren't even really looking for the minor planet. I had been working at the observatory to take a visual catalog of all of the Messier objects. The Messier objects, just so you know, were a catalog of stellar objects that were not comets. Cataloged back by a French astronomer by the name of Charles Messier, and he went through listing all the fuzzy objects in the sky that were not comets. And so I wanted to take pictures of them in color and have really nice images. So that night we were working on imaging the Crab Nebula, Messier Object 1. Spent all night working on it. Started around 9:30 in the evening. After getting the telescope set up and everything working right and focused, we started taking images of it. And we imaged it till about 6 a.m. when the sun started coming up. Didn't think anything else of it. We were looking for a nebula. We were looking at taking a picture of this nebula in color. Then just on a whim, like I always do, I got the data, looked at it, analyzed it a little bit, cleaned up the data, got rid of the noise. And then I stacked the images on top of each other, so that way I could have kind of a short film, a short film showing me everything that happened during the evening. And while I was watching this little bitty short 30-second film, I noticed that there was a star that began to move across the field of view. Of course, it's moving really slow because I've taken several hours worth of images, and so I knew obviously it can't be a satellite, obviously it can't be a space station or the shuttle, it's got to be something more exotic, maybe a minor planet or a planetoid or something like that. So totally by accident. Not even looking for one. Because I looked at it and I saw this and I thought, wow, this is interesting. I need to take this to my advisors and see what they think. So I took it to the faculty and I said, hey, is this how do I analyze this? This is totally outside of my field, analyzing the orbital parameters of this planetoid, of this minor planet. Which we thought it was, and so he gave me the software and showed me how to use it, and I plotted the course, and then I took the planetary orbit data for this object, what we call ephemeris data, and we sent it to the minor planet cataloging group at Harvard. And they got back to us a couple days later and said, congratulations, you have found a new minor planet that we don't have in our registry. So yeah, really exciting stuff.
Wow, that is impressive. So once they got back to you, that's when this process itself began, the whole naming of the planet itself. What can you tell me about the group that's responsible for naming these things? Like what kind, specifically for what you're doing, how difficult is it to pick a name? What do they not let you name it?
Well, in discussing naming the minor planet, because obviously you've discovered it, and so you get some naming rights. You get, of course, discovering rights and then naming rights should you choose to name it. It turns out the minor planet cataloging group out of Harvard, they give it a name, usually a couple of letters and a couple of numbers telling you what time of year the minor planet was discovered. And most minor planets keep that designation for the most part throughout all their time. Most minor planets aren't fascinating enough to get a name. But if you're a small school or you're an independent observer, an amateur astronomer, and you've discovered it, it's kind of neat to have a little bit of recognition, to have a name assigned to it that you yourself picked out. There are a couple of problems with naming the thing. The International Astronomical Union, they don't have a very deep sense of humor, so you don't ever want to name your asteroid anything funny or humorous. You have to remember that they're in charge of really serious scientific business, and most of astronomy and planetary astronomy deals with this serious business. So you don't want to name it something funny like I don't know anything funny, huh?
Jazz Star Rock Song.
Jazz Star Rock Song. No, you would not name a minor planet Jazz Star Rock Song. They wouldn't let you do that. They have a strict policy about not letting you name it after anybody famous, especially if that famous person has been, is still living or has died within the last 100 years. They don't like that kind of a naming thing. I'm not entirely sure why they don't like that, but I'm assuming it has something to do with with the posterity of the figure you're trying to name. No family members. You can't really name it after yourself. Sometimes you can name it after some copyrighted things. I know there's a couple of asteroids up there named the Enterprise or Voyager, after the NASA probes, by the way.
So what names are you looking at for this asteroid? Like, what names have you thought through? Have you come up with one specifically that you'd like to name it when you get the chance?
Well, there's a variety of options. I could name it after the university that I was working with. I could take a whole bunch of phonetic sounds based off of my name and the other discoverer's name. We could develop a name that's a combination of our names. Because we're not famous people, it's okay to name it after us. It could, have a combination of our last names or first names. But no, I haven't really given it much thought into what I want to name it or what we might name it at this point.
If you could, without any restriction, name the asteroid, what would you name it?
And that is
off the top of your head.
Off the top of my head, that is a really, really hard question to answer. Simply for the fact that, what do you name it? Probably Kepler. I mean, his his laws of planetary motion are pretty handy, and I used several of his laws to figure out the orbital period for the planet and the planetoid, and how far away it is from the Earth. And then later an adapted version of some of his laws to figure out how massive it is, how heavy, and then get an approximate size for it. So maybe Kepler off the top of my head, but don't really know. No, I'm just kidding. So I get asked that question a lot about buying stars and what all goes on with buying a star and naming it after, say, your sweetheart or your puppy or something like that. It's a novel, creative idea, and a lot of companies have taken on that idea, and they offer an interesting product. They give you a certificate, they give you a set of star charts, which are nice star charts, by the way, and they show you how to find the star. There's a couple of issues with it, though, because it's really a hard star to find most times. It's dimmer than the human eye can ever see without use of a telescope, and even that you might need a really big telescope. But it also doesn't take into account that you can't just up and name whatever you want up there in space. You do have to go through the IAU in order to name these different things. Since space is shared by everybody, you want to make sure that everybody's going to understand what the name is for these different objects. So a global community, a global group of people are set aside to be able to help you work through that kind of a process. So that's the interesting thing about discovering a minor planet, or an asteroid in the common term, is that it takes a while to actually get to the point of naming it. There's a lot of stuff flying around out there in space, and a lot of it is on these really long orbits. It takes a long time for it to go around the sun. So in order to name an object, in order to make sure it's an object that you can name, you've got to watch that object for a good 4 years before they'll let you even consider naming it. Now, if you've discovered the object, obviously you've got naming rights and they'll allow you to name it. But like I said, you've got to watch it and observe it, make sure it's in a closed orbit for the next 4 years. Because you don't want to name something that's going to disappear after 6 months or something like that. Once that's done, then you can settle on a name. Maybe you've been thinking about it for a while and you've picked a name for your minor planet or your asteroid or whatever, and then you write that down. You write a kind of a defensive paper. It's a short little thing that you write explaining your rationale and your reason for naming the minor planet, what you name it. Send it to the IAU, and they deliberate over it for a couple of weeks maybe, and then they get back to you and let you know whether or not they've accepted it or whether you need to come up with something a little better. There are a lot of rules and regulations for naming minor planets out there in space. It can't be the name of a pet or a family member. That just doesn't usually set well with the IAU. They're very, very careful about naming things like that. Can't be a famous person, obviously, for a variety of political and public reasons, especially if that person is currently living. And also if the person has died anywhere within the last 100 years. It's kind of similar to not having a current or living people on coins. You just don't want to do that. And it can't be anything really humorous. You don't want to name it something funny, because everybody's going to have to put up with it and deal with it after this point. So I'm not doing anything necessarily with the IAU at this point, simply because there's not really a lot to do. We have to just kind of sit and wait and make sure that the asteroid or the minor planet is going to stay in its orbit for a while. And then at the 4-year mark, I'll be able to start the process of naming the minor planet, which will be kind of nice at that point. I don't have to really worry about anybody else jumping on it or staking a claim to it before I do. My name is tied directly to the minor planet. It's not going anywhere necessarily. And nobody else can lay ownership, not ownership, but lay claim to the fact that they discovered it. Because again, my name is on record. It's on file in both print and a digital format. So I don't have to worry about anybody else naming it. I've got the naming rights from here to whenever I could name it.